Welcome to our ongoing exploration of creativity in the Enneagram through the lens of the 27 subtypes. I'm Samantha Mackay, an Enneagram coach certified through the Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy. And today I'm talking with Sam Baldock, a self-preservation 2, an Enneagram coach certified by Integrative 9. We explore various aspects of the self-pres 2, including shape-shifting to be liked, and what the descriptions mean when they say the self-pres 2 is childlike, as well as how Sam recenters herself to make choices based on what she wants and needs rather than what others will like. Now, we don't dive into the nuances of the subtypes here. If you'd like to learn more about that, I've included some links below, as well as a link to Sam's website. Enjoy. What does creativity mean to you?
Oh, creativity. I think when I first read about creativity, I was like, oh, I don't do paintings and arts and all these things. But I was like, what creativity means to me as a two, I suppose, is my talking. I talk a lot, but it's about, then I thought about a bit more of like, what does that mean? But then I go, oh, I think it's like problem solving. It's about problem solving for other people more than myself, but probably other people getting creative on like, oh, they've got a problem. How can we fix that? And thinking about ideas. So I nearly think it's an ideas or problem solving way of being creative rather than an actual, sit down and do arts and crafts type of creative. Because when I look at other people, I go, oh, they're creative because they're really into, you know, painting or puzzles or whatever. And I really like doing puzzles and things, but I felt so long had the belief that, oh, I'm not a creative person. So I think it's only been the last couple of years that I've opened myself up to going, actually, what does creativity really mean to me? And then it doesn't have to mean what it means to other people. So, I love a good puzzle. I love a good problem solving Sudoku and all those types of things. But I think, yeah, problem solving in the sense of what can we do? What's the solution? And how do I use my creativity and my thoughts and processes about, oh, there's so many different ways we can attack this. How can we go about it? And trying to do it that way. And I think it's, in a sense, too, meeting the needs of other people, like when they have problems and like, oh, okay, I've got to get my creativity. I'm like, oh, how can we fix this? Or how can I fix this for the other person? Like, how can I help? How can I be helpful? And so
Mm.
sometimes I think my problem solving is very much about how can I be of service to somebody else by thinking about all the different options that they might have to fix a problem.
And you can really see that two piece coming through. I love your answer of talking. I create through talking. That was great. I love that. That belief that creativity is limited to painting and drawing really shuts us down to even engaging in other kinds of or what creativity might be.
Comes back to nearly childhood where you're doing an art piece and you're like, oh, you're not very good at, and the kid sitting next to you going, oh, that's not very good. Or you're not very good at art. I'm like, oh, okay. And then you don't look at it again. You're like, well, I'm just not very good at it.
That's
So
right.
why
You
would
just
I
take that as
try do it?
gospel. Yeah.
Yeah. You take that belief and go, oh, okay, all right, I'm not a creative person. And if someone goes, oh, let's go to a painting day or do this, I'm like, oh, no, I'm not creative. Whereas now I'd be like, oh, yeah, that could be fun and have a
Mm.
little bit more of a, it doesn't have to look a certain way, but there's part of me that goes, but it used to have to look a certain way. And I was never good at that. And I
Mm.
think I look at creativity people now and I go, yeah, but they're good because they've done it heaps of times. No one starts off going, oh my gosh, there's a Picasso. Like they start off like being, doing it a little bit, and they keep doing it because they enjoy it. And
Mm.
that's the where the creativity comes because their joy of doing the thing. And
Mm.
so I suppose, yeah, my joy of talking through things is I enjoy that. I enjoy talking through things.
Which leads me to my next question is what does creativity look like in your life, whether personally or professionally? I mean, I know you're a coach and that includes talking and problem solving, but you know, more generally, what does it look like in your everyday life?
I do actually really love to do puzzles, but I think sometimes it comes to me through journaling, like writing out my thoughts and coming up with ideas of ways to do things. I think that I'm doing it every day in that sense. I don't think I've thought about it as being creative before, but parenting's creative. You've got to be very creative when you're a parent, very creative when you're a parent. But yeah, definitely through my coaching as well, professionally, it is about, putting talks together. What stories am I going to entwine that will fit that? And I think storytelling is really important. And so when I'm doing speeches and things or workshops, it's really important. How can I bring a story that, or an analogy or a concept in that'll be give people a different way of thinking about things?
You're right, storytelling is so important. So, what supports you to be creative?
I think I need time to process things. Like I need time. Like I'm not a put on the spot, make a decision. Like I want to have the time to observe and think about things and get into that moment. And sometimes it's like literally going outside or being in the sun or going to the beach for half an hour. Or I find doing things that can clear your head, like doing a puzzle because you're focused on like trying to find the next piece. You can't overthink things. And I'm very good at overthinking and constantly ruminating on what should I be doing? How should this look? What should it look like in terms of if you're trying to do a social media post or something, you're like, oh, how should this be written? And oh, I don't know, I'm stuck on these things. And it's like, what's something that can clear your head? And I like to be by myself, the beach, going sitting and listening to the beach or being mindful at the river. I really love breath work and being mindful and just spending some time, even if it's just 10 minutes of just being present can sometimes help my creativity because I think sometimes creativity gets lost when we're so busy and hustling and trying to do the thing. We lose our creativity even though we're trying so hard to do it. And sometimes I find like journaling is a really good tool for me when I'm feeling really stuck and I'm like, what is holding me back? I'm like, oh, journaling can sometimes just be to get everything out of your head so that you can clear it. And just because, yeah, and parenting can be chaotic and it can be very pressureful. And I feel like creativity for me doesn't open up under pressure. Like things like that doesn't help me. So, and I think time, it's not that you need 10 minutes or an hour or 3 hours or whatever it is, but it's like, what can you do in that time can be shifted by having some time of mindfulness, like spending 10 minutes getting yourself in the right state can be, worth an hour of not productive time in a sense. So it's looking at how you spend your time and energy to get into that creative space. And with parenting, like it's always that you can always come back to things. I always go, you can always come back to things. Things don't always have to be a finished product. Conversations don't always have to be a finished product, or, a piece of work doesn't always have to be a finished, and looking at in a sense of like, just what's the first draft going to look like? What's something to get something on paper can sometimes be helpful as well.
I like applying that concept of the first draft to relationships and parenting as well.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes with kids, it's chaos, and sometimes it does feel perfect and sometimes it feels imperfect. But I love the idea of this concept of sketching in these intangible spaces. And I never would have thought about how you might sketch as you craft a relation, like the space between two people, whether it's friends or parents or kids, like colleagues. I'm loving that metaphor at the moment.
I use a lot of pens that are erasable, and it helps me go, you know what? Nothing's set in stone. Like I'm not writing this in concrete. It can always be shifted and molded. It's kind of like when you're working with clay, you can always shift and mold things right up until the last piece. If we think about it, it's got to be perfect all of the time, which I've definitely had times of perfectionism, like if things have got to be perfect and I've put too much pressure on and that creativity just flies out the window. It's not here. So it's when you go, well, this is just a first draft. I'm just using a pencil. It can always be erased or altered or edited to make it a little bit better when you've got a little bit more time, a little bit more space, a little bit more capacity, and a little bit more learning maybe.
So how do you manage and do experience creative blocks? What's that like for you?
I definitely experience creative blocks when I'm feeling under pressure and I feel like I have to have it all prepared. I think that's where I can get blocked when I'm like, I've got to be prepared. I've got to spend hours doing a said thing. Like I said, I've got a speech next week, and I thought my self-preservation goes, oh, you've got to have it all written out. It's half an hour. You've got to practice it 15 million times. You've got to make sure that you're right on the deadline. You're going to say exactly how you need to say it. And I think that's where I stifle with my creativity because I'm like, oh, it just puts too much pressure on it. And so I feel like I've seen in the past a lot of times I've gone, well, this has to be perfect, so I've got to spend 3 hours on it, and then go, three people have seen it. It wasn't actually that important. It's like I put importance on, I suppose, what people think of me, is like what that might look like, what people think of my own creativity, like what people might say or judgment or that fear of rejection of like, they might think it's terrible and I spend all this time and energy on it. I think I've learned over time, especially those last few years, that actually I don't need to put so much pressure on myself, that I don't need to, that it doesn't have to be perfect, and that if I do it as well as I can in that moment, that that's good enough. But I think I've spent so much time going, well, it's not ever going to be good enough. So I'm just going to keep doing these drafts and I'll never get to the perfection, never get to the end where it's good enough. And so I think creativity, when I get in blocks, it definitely comes back to understanding that it's a mindset thing. When I'm in blocks, it's usually like, what will others think of it? And it's worried about that and not worried so much about what I think of it. I think I spent so much of my life caring so much and wanting the approval of others that it's going, well, what will everyone else think of it? And not sitting in the like, well, what do I want it to look like? What would feel good for me to look like? What would I like to see? And it's like, when I'm not in that state, when I'm not feeling blocked, it's about what I want to put out there in the world and how I want to be perceived, and that it's going to be okay no matter what I say or how it comes out or what it looks like, that it's okay.
And it's so interesting how, as a two, it's all about the stress coming from the focus on the other. When you bring that attention back on yourself, it creates a bit more space, not just for creativity, but for ease and for presence. And when it comes to these speeches, it's looking for comfort in terms of preparation and security, that everything's under control. But actually, comfort can come just from breathing into the moment and noticing that this is how I want it to be, and it's all going to be okay just as it is.
Yeah. And I think too, knowing my Enneagram helps a lot in that sense, because I can feel like I know that my default is to worry about everyone else. And my default is to think that when I do think into myself, like, well, what do I want? It's feeling a bit selfish. It's going, oh, that's a bit selfish. You should be thinking about others. You should be hoping, pleasing as many people as possible so that they like you. That's going to keep you safe. But it's understanding that that's a default setting and I get to choose.
And that sounds like something that you would have struggled to have learned without knowing that you're a self-pres 2. So how has knowing that shaped or changed creativity for you?
I think it has a lot, in the sense of when I found out my Enneagram type and my subtype, finding out that's how I am, need to be organized, need to be, get everything prepared, and that's how I am. I think it reminds me that that's a default setting and it's keeping me safe, but it's not always the path I want to take. And I've always gone, well, that's not the path I want to take, but I better be safe. I better lean into that comfort. So I think it's allowed me to do more. It's allowed me to go, you know what, I can do more than I think I can do, because I've spent my whole life leaning into that default setting going, no, you want to be safe. That's good. You want to feel comfortable. You don't want to feel uncomfortable. And so if I didn't know my Enneagram type, I might still be there. Like, I might still be going, no, my body's teaching me the right thing. I want to be safe. But it's going, yeah, it's keeping you safe based on your past experiences and all these things, but you can step out of that, and then I get the choice. And so I lean into that choice part of going, yes, and remind myself of that. If there's things that I want to do, like I never thought I'd do public speaking, and now I'm like, yeah, public speaking, go for it. But I never thought I could do it. But then when I learned, I'm just really fearing that everybody in that room is going to reject me. And that actually my anxiety that I had of public speaking was going, they're all laughing at me. They're all hating me. I shouldn't, as soon as I open my mouth, they don't like me. Whereas now I can go, yes, and yes, and that might be true for some of them, but it doesn't impact me to go, actually, what do I want to do more? And I want to do that public speaking. I want to get good at talking. I want to have that as a strength. And so I get to choose. And so I love that I have this center of my Enneagram and my self-preservation and understanding, yes, this is my default. And yes, sometimes that means that when I get annoyed at my husband, I'll go and do his laundry so that he's happy with me if we've had an argument, because, that's my default setting and I can see it though. I can see it and I'm going, no, that's okay. I'm happy to do that. But it's going, when do I need to leave this space and where it's okay? And it's been keeping me safe for a good long time. And that's such a good thing that I have this. And I think something knowing about my Enneagram, the biggest thing is going, where am I doing something for somebody else because I really want to do it for somebody else? Or where am I doing it because I just want them to like me? Like, there are people I'm not saying I don't care about them, but the relationships aren't that important. But I would go above and beyond just to make sure that I didn't know there were people out there that didn't like me. Whereas now I can come back and go, why am I doing this task? Why am I helping that person? Am I helping them in the, that I want to help them and that makes me feel good and it makes them feel good and that's a really good thing? Or is it that I'm doing it because, yes, I'm a helpful person, but that if I'm only doing it to get the thanks or the acknowledgement or the appreciation or the thought that that person likes me, that's actually probably not the right reason to do that. And so I think I've been probably less helpful in a sense over the last, few years since learning my Enneagram type, because now I'm like, okay, why am I doing this? What's the underlying thing? And knowing that I can be okay with rejection and I can be okay if people don't like me, if they're not relationships that are really super important to me, and it's okay.
And that is such an important distinction and hard distinction for twos to make, to ask themselves, am I wanting to help someone like genuinely, or do I have an agenda? Is there something strategic behind this? And that acknowledging and trying to accept that sometimes our help is strategic can be very uncomfortable, because it's not pretty.
Yeah. And it's hard because I still don't want people to know that. I don't want people to know that I'm wanting to help them. Like I want people to go, oh, she's so caring, she's so helpful. I think of that and sometimes I can see it and I can acknowledge it. Or sometimes I see it and acknowledge it after the fact. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But sometimes I see it and acknowledge it in the moment and I go, no, I'm going to choose to do it anyway. Like I'm not a perfect person. I had one time where my dad asked me to do something. He wanted me to get some like Glad wrap. So I went and got it for him. And then I came home and I gave it to him when I was a bit younger. And I said, hey, Dad, I've got you that Glad wrap. I put it in the drawer for you. And my brother, who is a 6, said, you know that you're only telling him that so he says thank you to you? And I was like, no, I'm being like, he's like, if you just put it in the drawer, he wouldn't have had to say thank you to you and you wouldn't have known about it. Like, but he's like, you did that so he would say thank you. And I was like so upset at the time because like, no, I did not. No, like got very defensive. But then at the time after he said it and then I learned about my Enneagram, I'm like, oh my gosh, I did too. I did. I did. Like I just wanted to be known as the helpful daughter that did the thing. And I liked when he said, thanks, Sam, for getting that for me. And I went, yeah, thanks. That's okay, Dad, anytime. But I got something out of it, and it's like, it's okay to do that too. I think sometimes we look at the amazing side of the twos where they're only helpful when it serves them and things. I'm like, we're real people where sometimes we just want the acknowledgement and sometimes we want the external validation. And that's okay sometimes too. But I think it's good to be aware of when you're doing it and when you're not. And it's not always serving us or the other people.
And I think it's important to recognize for heart types in general, a lot of validation is necessary and required, especially in that first phase of inner work, because you can't expect the ego to let go of some of its hold unless it's gotten its needs met. And its needs include getting a lot of positive validation to know that it feels safe.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly okay. So there's a part of the self-pres 2 dynamic that can often see itself as a child in search of an adult, or that it's not grown up, because we talk about it as sort of having a childlike quality to it, or can sometimes have that teacher's pet quality, which I think, can be misunderstood to some extent. How have you seen that translate for you through creativity?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because I think when I first, learned about that childlike thing, I was like, I'm not a child. Like like people don't look at me and go, oh, she's silly and immature. Like people would go, oh no, she's mature well above her age in the sense of when I was growing up. But then I looked at it like every time I enter a room, I feel like everybody else knows more than me, even if I'm an expert walking into the room, So it's like if I'm doing something, and I think with creativity, because I've spent such a huge part of my life going, well, you're just not creative. Like my nan was into paintings and she had her own kiln and she was very artistic and creative. But I was always like, oh, no, you're not creative. And I had that mindset of you're not creative. And so when I look at creativity, sometimes I feel like I'm a beginner and I'm new at everything. And sometimes it's like I've got to look around and be like, well, what are they doing? Where are they? What does theirs look like? How do I have to be like somebody else? Because it's like they're the expert and I'm always a beginner, even if I'm in a room where I'm probably more of an expert than they are. But it's like I'm always searching for other people to get that validation of like, okay, they're doing it like that. Okay, I can do it like this. I feel like I've spent my whole life feeling like a little person inside going, well, you've got to follow the rules. You've got to do how other people do it. And you can't step out and have an opinion that other people might not have or do it differently. And having, I suppose, that compliance of like, oh, well, I've just got to comply and do it how everyone else has got to do it because I'm little. And not as in like my stature, it's just that I'm little and that I don't know enough and that I need others to tell me how it should be done. And then I'll follow that.
Because it's interesting. That could sound like the one following rules or the social sixes approach to rule, there's an obedience piece. But in this case, I think for the self-pres too, correct me if I'm wrong, it's that sense of like, what does the adult in the room say? Because when the teacher tells us what to do, and the teacher's pet does what the teacher says. And so there's an authority figure there. But for the two, it's not really about the authority or following what that person says. It's about being liked or appreciated or getting the positive feedback of doing what the adult in the room says is the appropriate way to do something.
Yes. Yeah. And I see it as like I can walk into a room and somebody can be younger than me. It doesn't matter what age they are. They're the teacher and I'm the student and I've got to go, oh, they like blue. I like blue. Okay. Like it's kind of that. How can I mold myself to like what they like so they'll like me in return? And so I can change the way I speak to people based on I'm trying to almost mirror that. So I'm copying how they're saying, oh, okay, you like it that way? Yeah, sure. I'm not here to rock the boat. And it's interesting because when I do say things my opinion, it feels like I'm being the naughty kid. Like I'm not doing what I'm told and I'm doing the wrong thing, even though I'm not. But it's because I have that childlike, oh, I'm stepping out and I'm saying something differently. I can have that feeling of like, I just feel so small when I do that because I feel like I'm just being the naughty kid that's doing the wrong thing.
And so it's almost a feeling of smallness.
Yeah. Yep. I think it's the feeling more so of that smallness that I'm little, like yeah. And maybe it's that less than, and it's probably part of the worthiness thing, but it's definitely, I want them to like me, so I will do what I'm told in a sense. And so it's when I step out of that and I'm not doing what I'm told or I'm, putting another opinion out there that's not the same as the people in the room, it can feel really uncomfortable. It feels like I'm, that little kid. And I can be in room of people that I'm probably the expert in an area, but it can still feel like I'm very hyper vigilant of what people's thoughts are and feelings and emotions and things. I suppose being a heart type, I'm very aware of other people's emotions or how they're feeling or how their body language might change if I say something in a certain way.
Yeah, it's really tricky, like to notice that and then to stay with the discomfort that we sense from doing something that might, put us in the firing line. It is very scary when we start to see our ego and try and just stretch it just a little,
Yeah. And I wonder even too if it's the firing line, but the next step of that is it's the firing line and then that person's not going to like you because of it. That comes with that too of I just need those people, all these people in this room, the 100 people, they just all have to like me because then my life will feel good and I'll be comfortable. But then I need to have 100 opinions, whatever their opinion is. So when I'm stepping out of that, noticing that has been a huge shift for me going, actually, I can step out of that. It's a choice again. I think it comes back to going, this is definitely my default setting and I feel safe here. And sometimes and becoming a parent has been a huge part of that when you've got to advocate for your children. And all of those things are definitely, stepping up and not being a little kid and going, I don't need this person to like me. And I've had people say before, you don't need this person to like you. You can tell them your opinion. And I've gone, oh, that sounds so hard as a two. And as a self-preservation going, oh, I don't, that's tricky for me. Whereas I know for other Enneagram types, that might not be as tricky. They go, well, that's my opinion. I'm allowed to say it. Like, whereas I'm like, no, what's your opinion first? So then I can mold myself to fit and feel in there and feel okay about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Parenting pushes us in so many ways.
So many
ways, regardless of your type. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my last question is, what creation, personal or professional, are you most proud of?
Interesting that we're talking about parenting because I probably would actually say my kids. I think not just parenting my kids, but having to step up and be that person that they need me to be as their parent, and how that looks different to what feels fully comfortable all the time.
Mm,
And, advocating for my kids. I have a child with additional needs, and sometimes advocating feels like it's a lot of energy
mm,
and it feels tricky. You feel like you're pushing, a ball up a hill, but it also helps you grow.
mm,
So it's that, they're amazing. I've got two boys and they're incredible little people. And I go, oh, they're probably my biggest creation, and they're my biggest learning and my growth factors that I've had in my life. And, I firstly got into really learning about myself before I became a mum, because I wanted to, be more for them.
mm,
And it was interesting because it was for them to start with, and then it was for me. Like, it was like, before I become mum, I want to be the best mum I can possibly be. And I need to, make sure I understand myself and have the self-awareness to be a parent. And I did that, I think, as a two, going, well, I need to be, liked, and I need to be good enough for them. But then for now, it's actually, that's reflected back on when I show up as my best self and I show them how to step out of myself and be creative and stand up and do the things I never thought I could do. That's also partly for them to see that.
yeah, it's amazing how parenting and our kids are such creations, right from the beginning all the way through. Whereas it's just one creative process. So, yeah.
Really is, and it changes, and it's not predictable. I think that's a good thing about the creation. It's not predictable, whereas it's not something you can completely mold in a certain way, but you get to guide and support them.
Mm.
And so that helps too, to see that you get to see the end product, but you're not fully in control, I think. You're not fully in control. And I think sometimes creativity, the best creativity is when you're not fully in control of the outcome.
And so much, but whether it's parenting or art making, like whatever kind of creative practice, letting go and allowing something to continue on its own path and its own journey and its own life, to realize it exists outside of you. It is not you and you don't have control of it, is such an important thing to learn. Wow. Thank you. This has been great. I loved hearing about creativity from that real a deep understanding of the self-preservation too. So thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Thank you so much for having me on.